Hi everybody, I'm Michael Rosen from Samplistic Media. We're here in California, just north of San Francisco, and we do creative production, post-production, motion design of all types. And I'm excited to show you some of the stuff that we get into in Cinema 4D, Redshift, Red Giant stuff. So let's take a look at our reel, and then we'll get into it.
Show your world the way only I can see it. I free myself for today and forever from human immobility. I'm in constant movement. I approach and pull away from objects. I creep under them. I move alongside a running horse's mouth. I fall and rise with the falling and rising bodies. This is I, the machine, maneuvering in the chaotic movements, recording one movement after another in the most complex combinations. Freed from the boundaries of time and space, I coordinate any and all points of the universe wherever I want them to be. My way leads towards the creation of a fresh perception of the world. Thus I explain, in a new way, the world unknown to you.
So hopefully that gives you an idea of the type of stuff that we do here at Samplistic. It's kind of a very broad spectrum, but that's what makes it so much fun. Today I'm going to get into kind of a bag of miscellaneous tips and tricks. Hopefully these small little things and ideas in Cinema 4D will give you some creative inspiration. And then we're going to jump into a bit of a project breakdown. The project that we're breaking down is a 30-second spot directed by myself and Dalek Miller here at Samplistic. And the commercial is for a futuristic watch. And this watch comes from a book written by Jason Michael Primrose called Lost Children of Andromeda. And in the spot, there are a bunch of different techniques that we use Cinema 4D and Red Giant for. And so that will be fun to break down. Let's get into the first tip of the day, and then we'll get to that soon. So here's something I don't hear people talk about very much. Did you know that you can control the contribution of your lights in your scene in post with Redshift? So basically I have this little setup here with some assets from the asset browser and some Redshift lights around them. And for each light, I go to details, and under light group, AOV light group, I give them each their own light group. So if I go to light 1, it's light group 1. If I go to light group 2, it's light group 2, and so on. So I've made those. And then when I go to render this scene, I'm going to go into my Redshift settings, and in here, under AOV and AOV Manager, you can see that I've set up 3 beauty passes. And the only difference between the beauty passes is down here, under light group settings, I've assigned 1 light group to each of the beauty passes. And that's it. So when I render it out and I bring it into After Effects here, let's delete these and I'll bring it in. So that's what it looks like kind of normally, but I'm going to put the extractor plugin on it, and choose up here my different light. You see I have these light groups. So there's light group 0. And I'm going to put that on add and duplicate the layer. And then I'm going to choose the next one to be light group 1. And then I'm going to choose the next one to be light group 2. So now if I turn the opacity of any of these layers, I can turn on or off a light and animate the lights however I like in After Effects in post. Pretty cool. So I haven't really heard too many people talk about that type of thing, so maybe you find that useful. But you can also do other things with the lights too. For instance, I can change the hue of a light, and so on. You can change the sharpness of it with levels. Just gives you a level of control that, who knows, might be useful. Say there was like flashing lights and you didn't know exactly where you wanted them to flash. You could render with them all the way on all the time and then flash them when you want to in After Effects. Same thing can be done in Fusion or any other compositor. All right, cool. And so this next one is about going from Cinema to Illustrator. I'm not really an Illustrator guy. I mean, I use it, but I don't heavily get into Illustrator. But if I were, I'd want to know that Cinema 4D can export vector graphics to Illustrator, and it's pretty much as easy as this. So I've already got my Sketch and Tune scene here ready to go, and so you go to File, Export, and find Illustrator, and you could try to just leave these settings as default. The one thing that is a little strange about the conversion from 3D to 2D layers in Illustrator is this Z order, and we have one object that actually goes around the front of the dinosaur and around the back, and you sometimes have to play with this menu, whether it starts from the back or starts from the front or the center. In this case, I'm going to choose center and hit OK. And here we have it in Illustrator. And all of this is vector information. And it's quite heavy. And you can see that it did a pretty good job of bringing the dinosaur into the middle. But what's cool is you get these lines. It's all vector information. So everything can be broken up into all its polygons, and what's really cool is that this outline here can be changed to new brushes. So that's pretty cool. You can change the weight of it. So I'm thinking maybe somebody will do something pretty cool with that. All right, and here's another quick tip about text in Cinema and keeping it automatically named for you in your object manager. I actually find it really, really important. So you have some text. You have a text object, and let's say that I type in wow, and it still says text here, and say I have like a whole bunch of terms that I want out there. I'm going to be copying this text and moving it around a bunch. So I want not just to see the word text a whole bunch of times up here in the object manager. So this is a quick solution for that. what you do is you right click on the text and you add a programming tag espresso. And it's not going to be scary. It's really easy. Just drag the text object in there. You just set it up at once and you're done. And then grab the text object and drag it in there again. So if we click on the text object over here and we find the text spline area right here and drag it up to this red, it makes it an output. And then if we go to the basic tab right here and take the name and drag it up here, it makes it an input. And you can just attach one to the other, and then it says wow up here where the text is. And if I copy that and I type something different in here, like something, it changes to something right there. And if I duplicate it again, and so on, it will change all of those. So that's really cool and all. Keeps you organized, and you just close this and just keep going. But what happens when you have a whole bunch of text in there, like a paragraph? Often what this will do is it will push this way out, and then you have to grab it and bring it back, and that's no fun. So I'll show you a trick around that. So over here you type string, and left string is the one you want. So if you put left string here, you can pipe it through the left string input and result here, and then you have this count item way down here, and you can just say how many digits you want to go for your text, and it will crop it off. So now it'll just have that many letters. So that's something that I use anytime I have to use text a lot, because it's so nice to actually see names up here. Cool. And now here's one about controlling a sequence of frames, 2D animations with Mograph. So I made this simulation just to show something happening in time, and it's 2D. It's rendered out as frames. So now I want to bring this in and control that with Mograph so I can do some interesting things with it. I'm going to go to CV import, and I'm going to, actually I think I'm going to do plane from image, and if I click this, you get this little dialog. I think we just want to pick the directory, and here's the directory. Let's see what happens. So we can see every single material here for each of the frames, and we can see all the frames here, and you can see they're showing up over here as well. So what I can do is put them all into a cloner. This will help me sort of organize it. But in this cloner, I'm going to put it on sort, and I'm going to make it linear. I'm going to make a plane effector, and it's by default set to position. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn up modify clone. And as you see, I turn that modify clone up. It's controlling which frame is being shown. So that means that we could also do the same thing with the strength here. But what that also means, if I turn that all the way up, is if we use a field, like a linear field here, we can control that forward and backward. Now remember, it's 2D. So you're just controlling the animation playing on this card. Another thing that I like to do for if I'm doing viewport stuff is just to select all these, and on the viewport tab, turn it to no scaling, get a little bit better quality. So you can use this in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's useful for like UI animation, but we'll just put it in another cloner. And already you can see that there's some pretty interesting stuff that you can do. So if I turn this at an angle, you can see that you can get these interesting like playback sort of effects. It's pretty fun to play around with. So there's a lot of things you can do with that. And now here's a quick tip about using multiple track modifier tags on objects and what that can get you. Okay, so I have this cube just animated moving around in a square here, and I'm gonna put the animation track modifier tag on it. And there's a lot of things that you can do with this. By default, it's set to like spring. So as it goes now, you see it has a little bit of spring, and you can adjust the stiffness, and it's kind of like a jiggle. But I'm going to turn this tag to posterization, and this is where you can control sort of the frame rate of the movement. So if I turn it up to 2, it's skipping 2 frames at a time, and you can sort of see it jaggering there a little bit, and then I'll turn that up a little bit, and you'll see it more sort of chunking through the animation. And that can be really cool for some like stop motion type stuff, or just a lot of different things. I'm going to turn it up even more. So now, let's see, maybe 10, maybe a little bit more. You see it just kind of getting to these locations, but not going there. But it is still moving there, even though you're not seeing it. So what you could do is put something like the tracer effect or tracer object on it. And you see now it's like tracing all the way there. And the tracer has this cool mode where you can click from end and determine how many frames it has before it disappears. So that kind of gives you this ability to kind of have these sort of tracers coming off of your object different ways. And yet your object is basically just in one location to the next location. So it gives this effect like it's really, really speedy. But then what I realized is that you could add another animation tag, track modifier tag on to the end of this and bring back some of that spring to each sort of place that it chunks to. And it's very subtle, but you can see that that just kind of creates this nuanced effect. And so from there, you can adjust the frame rate of your animation and give you these different looks. Kind of neat. Okay, so now it's time to take a look at the Sync Watch commercial. So one of the fun things about this commercial was that it takes place in a science fiction future. And we had fun rolling around the ideas of what would this sort of new technology device be advertised like, say, 30 years in the future. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll come back and get into it.
I'm an evolutionary. I go wherever.
I'm synced.
The 8-track,
I'm on it.
any sanctuary,
I'm an evolution.
I speak my mind. Ultimate freedom right at my wrist.
Trends, tragedies, and everything in between.
Information is
For the
salvation.
life I want to be living.
I'm an evolutionary.
I'm an evolutionary. I create with ease.
Ease.
My imagination is infinite.
Say what I want to
Sync
see.
is the prompt.
I'm with it, Sync.
In the countdown to the end
One thing we can count on is each
is
other.
each other. When we're synced,
we're one.
Okay, so that was the spot. We had a great time making it. There's a lot of techniques that we used, Red Giant and Redshift, Cinema 4D for VFX stuff. We even made Mograph projections of light and put that on people a little bit. But the first thing that I'm going to get into breaking down today is just something that you can use for any type of device, whether it's an iPhone or a laptop. Basically a way to replace screens on your already rendered stuff in After Effects. When you're rendering something like this and you want to, it takes a little bit of time to render out of Redshift, and you want to maintain the ability to change what's actually on that screen for the client. So first things first, you have your render and it's ready to go. And you want to set up your AOVs so that you have a matte that you can use for the screen, especially since this is a curved screen. So if I go into Redshift and I go to AOV and I open up the AOV manager, I can set this up to give us what we need. So I'm going to find Puzzle Matte, and Puzzle Matte lets you define materials or objects that you want to assign to a red, green, or blue channel for using as a matte later on. So I'm going to leave it on material ID, and I'm going to just change this to 1, 2, and 3. So I'll get those options. And that's pretty much all you have to do with the AOV to set it up for this. But then you also have to go into your materials that you want to assign to 1, 2, or 3. And in this case, I want all this glass right here to be as one of the materials. So I'm going to select the material that is this screen, this shiny screen here. And I'm just going to go to the output node, and it shows me my material ID number here. And I'm just going to change that to 3. So for this, that's all we need to really do. And you'll see how it works in After Effects. That's to get a matte for the screen. The other thing I want to do is, for that object, I'm going to add a tag so that After Effects can know exactly where that is in space. So I'm going to right click and go to render tags, and go to external compositing tag and just add that on there, and I like to check it to be a solid. So now I'm going to render. Okay, here in After Effects, I'm going to import that Cinema 4D file directly into After Effects. I'm going to drag it to the timeline, and I'm just going to hit extract. So what this has given me is all my cameras and this red object in space, which is the screen that I specified earlier in the Cinema 4D project with the external compositing tag. So I'm going to delete the cameras that I don't need. Just keeping the camera that was on. And if we play through this, we should see that red layer is essentially in the center of the screen, but it's not rotated correctly. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and we should see that it sticks to the screens. And now if I just move that a little bit down here to cover the area that I need to cover, we're in good shape. So now how do we replace what's on that screen? I'm going to right click this and say pre-comp, and I'm going to say leave all attributes. Now this layer is replaced with a composition. It's still in the same place. So I can go into that composition, and it's actually pretty small, I think. Yeah, 200 by 100. So I'm just going to make it a lot bigger. Maybe that's a little too big, but anything is probably pretty good. And now it'll be really big here, so we can scale it down, back down to the size of the screen, just about. And I'm going to drop it on top, and we see that red is still in there. And now anything that we put in this comp is going to be on that screen, or at least moving with it. So let's take one of these photos and put it on there. Now we need to crop that screen with the puzzle mat that we had from before. So I'm going to take this EXR sequence, which has that puzzle mat encoded into it, and I'm going to duplicate this and put it on top, and I'm going to add the extractor plugin onto it, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to see that it has that puzzle mat on it. And you can see that the blue color is there on that material for the screen. So now if I change the alpha to be the puzzle mat blue, I have a layer here where that material shows up. So now I can use that for a track mat for the screen, and all I have to do is go alpha track mat, and there you go. And that's how you can replace the screen. Okay, really quickly I want to go through shots like this. There's a couple little tricks that if you know them, there's a lot of different ways to play with this stuff. In After Effects here, I'll just show you. It really kind of boils down to just doing a number of layers, and you can render them out separately, or you could put them all in the same Cinema 4D project. I have them rendered out separately here in After Effects. So if you see, we sort of have one layer that is this, which is sort of the edge of the buildings growing, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then below that, we have this these glow sort of things. Really, it's another render that if I turn off this Gaussian blur that's vertical and this optical glow, it's really just another bit of the model being exposed by effectors here, added on, and we just blur that and add a glow, and it's added on to that effect of sort of growing these buildings. And another pass of blue, just again highlighting that edge of that growth there. And below all that is the render of the watch, and I'll just show you this separately. The watch is there, and these buildings are growing. So just really quickly, here I am in Cinema, and I have this building. It's a few pieces of geometry. I just have it in a connect object in a null. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a poly effector, and I'm going to put that into the object. And under effectors on the poly effects object, I'm going to make a plane effector. It makes it go crazy. I'm going to turn off position, and I'm going to turn on scale, and I'm going to turn it to absolute. So it's basically saying make all of these polygons scale down to 0. But now under fields, I'm going to add a box field, which will say everywhere in this box you should scale the polygons to 0. And you can see what it's doing there. I'll make this box a little smaller. So it's just affecting the polygons as if each one was like a clone. And what we can do is we can make this really thin, and it will sort of have its effect in certain places. But all we have to do now is say everywhere where the box isn't, should be scaled down to 0. And all you have to do that on the box field is go to remapping and click invert. And now if we make the whole thing a little wider but keep it thin, we can scale up the city and get these little bits and pieces of it, like a scan across it. And if we turn it a little bit at an angle, you can start to get some really interesting scans. So that's the premise of the whole thing, basically. And you can make different kinds of renders depending on what you want to do, putting different colors or shaders or effects on that. And then what I did was I used a plugin from Chris Schmidt at Rocket Lasso, a plugin that I like a lot called Mesh to Spline, and I made the geometry splines. So I'm just going to drop this object into Mesh to Spline, and it makes some of it splines to start off with, but because this is such a dense model, I'm just going to click override, and my computer has no problem turning all of that into splines. Now I'm just going to hit C on the keyboard to make that a spline object. I'm going to bring it back into I'm going to put it in that null again. And I'm going to change the poly effects mode from full polys segments to partial polys splines. And we can see that it's already starting to affect that as if they're lines. They're all splines, which is really cool. And then to render that in Redshift on the spline object, I'm just going to put a Redshift object tag. On curve, I'm going to turn it to hair strands. Okay, and then I'm just going to change the size down to 0.1, let's say. Okay, and that's pretty cool as a thing on its own, and I'm just going to add this bright glowing material to it. Okay, and so that's that look, and there really is just so many different ways that you could approach this. There's the cell render, there's sketch and tune. If you want to know more, you can visit Cineversity and my 2015 Michael Rosen project breakdown of titles for Microsoft Modern Workplace video goes through a whole hour of techniques and tips around this type of city data scan effect. Okay, and now we're going to go into a bit of simple camera tracking for VFX in Cinema 4D. Okay, so the next shot is this one here, outdoors, and this is a VFX shot where again, a lot of these things are very fast, but we have these types of shots where there's a city in the background and we're tracking, we're doing camera tracking in Cinema 4D, and we're rendering out the city and compositing them in After Effects. So we shot this scene like this, where there's just our group here, and you might notice a familiar face. And this is how we shot it, just with blue sky up, and it was an unfinished pool, actually, with some concrete wall back there. And we thought this could be a good opportunity to try and get a more sci-fi look to the shot, and we put this city in. Now, to do this, first thing you want to do is render it out, render out the shot that you want to do. So in Cinema, you can load that up. So let me do that right now. So you render it out as a sequence of images. So I'm going to go to Motion Tracker, track, I'm going to go to tracker menu, then get a motion tracker, and I'm going to load my shot into that. Just select the first frame and hit open, and it should load that in, and it says frame start 0 to frame 26. So that's correct. I'm going to turn the resampling up just to get a little higher quality. And sometimes, and you can play with this resampling. Every once in a while, it's better on lower quality, depending on if you're having a hard time or not. Sometimes, just to let you know, like, it's usually better on higher quality, but there is the odd situation where if you turn it down, you actually get the track that you were looking for more so. So the process that we go through with this is to first do a 2D track, which is to track different static objects in the scene. You don't want to track moving people or anything like that, because the computer will have a hard time with that. Because in the next process is the 3D track, where it will try to reverse engineer what the camera's doing based off of what all the objects in the scene seem to be moving like. So we want to get tracking points on the concrete, not so much on the people. So when we go to 2D tracking, and it says it's going to try to make 300 tracks, 300 tracking points, I'm going to turn down this minimum spacing because I want it to get as many tracks as I want it to get a little more tracks. And then I'm just going to say auto track, and it works really fast. Just a few seconds, and there you go. So you can see we got a lot of tracks over here on the concrete, some on this concrete and some on this concrete. That's pretty good. But we also got all these tracks on these people, and we don't really want. We could take the tracks on this concrete down here, but we don't really want it on any of the people because they could hypothetically be moving and it would throw it off. So what we'll do is we'll right click on the motion tracker and go to tracker tags and make a mask constraint. And this is sort of acts like a polygon, like an n-gon, where you can take these points and basically mask out the stuff that you don't want. And if you control click, you can make new points. And basically we want to just put a mask over the people in this shot. And this is sort of auto keyframed, so so it will move. So it will move over time. And the sky doesn't really matter, so I'm just going to put this up there. And let's just see where it goes. So that's pretty good, actually. It's a subtle camera movement, so we're not really getting anything. So you can see it automatically sort of crops out all those dots in there. And we're good to go. Yeah. So now we can go back to the tracker and move on to the 3D solve. Now, if you knew something about your camera, you could put it in here. For instance, you might know the focal length. What it presumes is that it's constant, meaning you don't zoom in during the shot. That's where it's starting, but if you don't even know that, then you turn this to unknown. Your sensor size, it's presuming that it's 36, which is typical 35 photo camera. And we have a couple different options here for the camera: nodal pan, planar track. These are good if you know that your camera is set up in a certain way. This was handheld, so I'm going to leave that as full 3D reconstruction. And I'm just going to hit Run 3D Solver. So this makes it look really easy, but what it's done now, and what it did was it made a 3D camera with a lock on it, and it made all these auto features. These are like nulls in your scene now. So if I go out of this view and look at it here, essentially these are the points that it is tracking, and it should make some amount of sense to you. Like for instance, here's these dots down here on the close step. There's these dots closer to the camera. Then there's these ones, they're further away. Then there's these ones, they're even further away. Then there's these over here on this step. So it is making sense. And if we go through this, we can see the camera is moving. So now we could actually put something in the scene. We could put like a cube in there. Let's just try that. So the cube's really big. I'll bring it down in size. Here, let's go to another view. Bring this cube. Move it back there. And you'll see that that cube is floating in space in perfect sync with the people in the scene. But you can see one thing that's wrong right now is that although it moves correctly, it's not calibrated. This is the horizon in our cinema scene, and this is our horizon in the camera, the actual camera. So we can do some things to sort of sync that up. And with the auto features, it's a little bit of well, we're not going to get it perfect because we have no specific features right on that scene, but I do see two features right here that are parallel to each other. So I'm gonna take this cube out. We'll just turn it off for now. I'm gonna go on here and I'm gonna add a calibration tag under tracker tags. Let's go vector constraint. A vector is what you use when you just want to have 2 points. A planar constraint is when you have 3 points. And so right now I just want to tell the computer that this is the x-axis. So it's given me this line here. So I'm going to put this one on here, and I'm going to put this one right here, and I'm going to say that this is the x-axis. Just when I click that X, look what happens now. Now our horizon is pretty lined up. Okay, now do we have anything that we know for a fact is a Y axis to calibrate from? Well, these two, it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be for this shot. So I'm going to make another tag. I'm going to make a vector constraint again, and I'm going to put it between this point right here and this point right here, and I'm going to tell it that that's the Y. So now let's see what we got. Ooh, that messed it up. Now it messed it up. It's actually not messed up because you can see that the horizon is still parallel. What it thinks is that it's dropped the scene lower. So another constraint that we can add is a position constraint. And basically what this means is this is a place in your scene. So by default it's 0, 0, 0, and it gives you this little dot. And if I say that 0, 0, 0 is this line, this dot that's connected to the x-axis there, now we have our 0 place in our scene. So if I turn this cube back on and bring it and zero out its position coordinates, it goes right there. And now we can begin to make buildings and things. that will go behind them. And if we want to see this a little better, there's a couple different ways, but I like to add a render display tag and turn it to lines. So that way I can just see through my objects and get a feeling for what that's like. And you can see that if those were buildings in the back, they would be moving correctly in our scene. But they are technically, they're too close. We need to push them further back. And this is where you can kind of use your eye or whatever. And so we build different buildings. And that's what they would be like in the back. So we had some kit bash buildings that were futuristic, and you know, of course you can model your own buildings, but if you're moving fast, you can use pre-built buildings. So I'll open up that project and you can see what that actually was. This was our final tracking. You can see it was a slightly different tracking going on, and we did get the horizon, we did get the ground plane kind of at this level, and here's the buildings in the background. But the thing to remember with all of this is that you're interpreting something that's like organic, which is the real world, and you're bringing it into the computer. So you use these tools however it gets you the result that you're looking for, and then you move on. If you needed to, so working with an auto track, that's one way of doing it. There's also manual tracking, and all of these tools, the constraints and the masks, can be used in a variety of ways. But for this, it was a really fast-paced cutting video, so we wanted to get the biggest bang for our buck and move on. So when we rendered this, we're talking about something that looks like that. And when we put it over the shot, it looks like that. So now we jump into using some Red Giant tools, and basically Primatte. I just put the exact same shot over top and then added the Primatte effect to basically key out the sky as if it was blue screen. So we didn't have to, this was one way that we got some production value kind of cheap. It happened to be a blue sky day, so we used that to our advantage and shot that as blue screen essentially. Let me see what happens if I just say auto define key. So there you go. I mean, that's not hard. You can see what it did. It's still missing a little bit of stuff over here, but that's really good for a situation like this. The hair could use a little more work, but for what we were doing, like I said, really fast cutting and stuff, this is really working. I'll show you how to use Primatte though, get you started on Primatte a little bit though. So if I didn't like what auto did for me, what I would do is I would come down here and select the eyedropper to first select the green screen, which in this case is blue, and just make some dots across the blue area. And that gets a little better on the edges here and everything, but it also takes out some of the some colors and tones in people. So we bring it back with this white one, which is like the foreground tool. So anywhere where you see, oh, it should be back there, put some dots there, and it starts to come back. And you basically can keep on working like that, back and forth, starting to get more and more careful. And what you can do is, to see it a little easier, you can say matte and you'll be able to see where it's working and where it's not working. And I can click the green one and get this sky a little bit more. It's pretty amazing, I have to say, being able to do this. You don't need to know a lot of the parameters and what they mean and how it works. This is just a really great way to get you started. And we're pretty good. Let's turn it back to comp. And if I then turn on the buildings behind them and turn the same layer on underneath that, we get our sky back and we have the buildings. Okay, I do see everything else, everything's looking pretty good. I do see in her hair here, there's still some blue left. I'm gonna use this decrease opacity, which is useful for the subtle tuning of foreground objects, otherwise entirely obscured like smoke, clouds, or wispy semi-transparent items. So I kind of think hair is wispy, semi-transparent. So I go and I click around this edge and it kind of takes care of that for me. The other cool thing about Primatte is that it has this thing called Core Matte. And what Core Matte tries to do is, I think, it tries to understand that once you get your object keyed around the edges, the middle is very rarely meant to come back. So you click this and if I can show you the matte, here we have this, and if I click Core Matte, it cleans up a bit of that. And you can see that we're still getting some stuff here, but in this shot, we don't care because we can look at it and nothing's coming through there. So that worked out pretty well. So that's it for me, folks. I had a great time putting this together for you. Hopefully there's some sort of creative inspiration there. If you feel like it, please get in touch with me. I'm Michael at samplistic.com. And I'm on Twitter at Samplistic Media. All the best.